Netflix Daredevil is the best thing that Marvel has ever made. Like, ever. And I know that may be a little bit controversial and opinion-based, which it is, but I genuinely believe that the Netflix Daredevil show is by far the best thing that Marvel has ever produced. And to be honest, it's not only my personal favorite comic book show of all time, it is in my top 5 shows that I have ever watched. Like, it is that good. I genuinely cannot think of anything else that Marvel has done, well, at least in TV format, which has just so much nuance and complexity as much as those 3 Daredevil Netflix seasons. Like, it just had everything, man. It had rich characters with some of the best comic book performances you'll ever see, beautifully written plots, gorgeous cinematography, and obviously incredible fight choreography, which is probably what the show is best known for. Unfortunately, though, after the insane cliffhanger that Season 3 ended on, we never got a proper continuation of that story in the form of Season 4, which actually had already been planned. Instead, the show was basically axed by the Big Mouse and discontinued, along with all the other Marvel Netflix shows, including The Punisher, which was also a very good show. I mean, it was just so sad, seeing what this show came to be and having it canceled after such an amazing 3rd season. I remember the Save Daredevil petition, which had thousands of fans, including myself, who had signed that petition to beg Disney, basically, to revive the Daredevil show. But years went by and nothing. And after years of pure uncertainty and not knowing whether we'd see Charlie Cox's Daredevil again.
That's great. Thank you.
How did you just do that?
I'm a really good lawyer.
So after this confirmation, basically, that Daredevil is actually back and is now a core part of the MCU, us fans obviously started to wonder, when will we get a new show or a continuation of the Daredevil show? And we did. But until we actually got to that, we got a few other cameos from him, which were, yeah. But jump forward now to the present day, 2025, and we are finally at the time where Daredevil Born Again has finally ended airing its 1st season. And it's definitely something. All jokes aside, I think this season was actually quite decent. There's definitely something worth watching for in this season if you love Daredevil, and which is surely going to please a lot of Daredevil fans. But there were some issues that this season had which were absolutely glaring. And most of them obviously have to do with the production hell that this project went through behind the scenes. I won't get into detail about that. I won't be talking about that in this video specifically, as you've probably heard what happened behind the scenes a million times before, and I'd rather just talk about the season on its own and the story. And basically, we're just going to discuss, the episodes themselves, really get down to the bone in each and every episode, talk about the standout moments and some moments which I personally had issues with it. So, Daredevil Born Again, is it good? Is it bad? Is it mid? Let's find out.
You don't necessarily show the best judgment when beautiful women are involved.
How would I even know if she's a beautiful woman?
I don't know. It's kind of spooky, actually.
So, before we start talking about this episode, let's put some things into context. Before this episode aired, we hadn't seen Daredevil in his natural element, meaning his own show as a standalone character, so like minus cameos, ever since basically season 3 dropped back in 2018. That was 6 years ago, almost a decade. And it also wasn't just the last time that we had seen Matt in his element, but it was also the last time that we had seen Karen and Foggy Nelson together. And more specifically, the trio of Nelson, Murdoch, and Paige, which season 3 pretty much literally ends with them creating their firm. And this trio was just literally the core of the Netflix show. Like, they were just special. They had this really, really great dynamic ever since season 1. And to see them basically unify again at the end of season 3 was just such a special moment to see. And we finally get the news that they're coming back for Born Again. And the first episode of Born Again actually opens up pretty much the best way it possibly can, by showing us the goated trio back together with a fun and lighthearted scene at Josie's bar, the iconic bar. They're having fun and laughing and having a drink and... Yeah, killing... oh my god. Killing off Foggy in the first 15 minutes of this new show was definitely a decision. A very ballsy and risky decision at that, especially since people, including me, have been begging to see Foggy and Karen back again just to kill off Matt's best friend and his supporting structure, essentially, right in the opening minutes. It also didn't help the fact that a part of the advertising for this show was that Foggy and Karen were going to be back. Like, they were all the promotional material and stuff, but they just got split immediately because right after this scene, Karen also ends up leaving Matt, as well as she basically moves to San Francisco because she was not able to handle her loss from Foggy. But this decision to eliminate Foggy was kind of also a good thing, because by killing off Foggy, you're basically eliminating Matt's moral compass. Like, Foggy is just that angel on his shoulder, whereas Daredevil was literally the devil on his shoulder. And getting rid of Foggy, his moral compass, really does set the tone for a really dark season. And we actually get to see those changes in Matt. We see huge changes, which led Matt to take some pretty drastic changes. But before we talk about that any further, let's actually talk about that whole opening sequence itself, because there is a lot to pick from that scene. First off, I really like the use of the changing aspect ratio when Matt uses his senses. It's a real neat way to show like his enhanced senses and all that, and how he focuses in onto certain sounds like Foggy's phone call. Even though it's like not the most groundbreaking thing ever done in filmmaking, like we've seen the technique of changing aspect ratios before, but it was a pretty neat way, the way it was used here to, really emphasize on Matt's senses. But anyways, the other thing which I wanted to talk about in this scene was, of course, the fight with Bullseye. First off, I love Bullseye. I think it was the best part of season 3, and honestly, I don't even think it's crazy to say this, but Bullseye is the best live action Marvel villain of all time. Okay, I don't care. He's that good. And seeing him back in the show was always a delight, and having him kill Foggy, it's very, very Bullseye. So with this fight sequence, the show clearly wanted to make and film a sort of one-shot take sort of fight scene, similar to how most of the iconic fight scenes were in the Netflix show. And that's neat, because the Netflix show fight scenes were actually really, really gorgeous to look at, especially since they had very minimal cuts, which made the overall fight scenes look even better. But for this scene, they also decided to cake this scene with the most horrendous CGI as much as possible. Seriously, there is so much bad CGI in this sequence, including a CGI smoke grenade, a very bad looking green screen. Seriously, there is just so much bad CGI in this sequence that at moments it completely took me out of it. And for some reason, when Matt and Dex get up to the roof, the first half of that scene is completely CGI. Like, you can tell their movement is just unnatural, and it comes off as very uncanny. But then there's this moment where you can tell when they switch to the real actors. Like, why not just film that entire scene with the actors themselves instead of animating these really uncanny ass CGI characters? And yeah, man, I just still have no idea how such a huge conglomerate, basically like Marvel with pretty much an unlimited budget, but they can still have such bad CGI. Other than that, though, I really feel like the performances of the actors themselves in this scene was really good and just carried this entire sequence totally. It's a very emotionally heavy scene given the subject matter, with Foggy basically dying and Karen trying to revive him, and Matt like listening to Foggy's heartbeat the whole time. It was it was tragic. And, Charlie Cox, Eldon Henson, Deborah Ann Wall acted their absolute hearts out. And obviously, Wilson Bethel being just an absolute menace as Bullseye, like he's just so iconic. And I swear that shoulder tap he gave to Matt was what sent Matt over the edge. Like that shit was just, it was diabolical. Anyways, yeah, Matt basically throws off Bullseye off that roof and almost kills him. And that was a line, he crossed a line over there. Like we know that Daredevil's whole thing is his no kill rule, and he really wanted to kill Bullseye in that scene. And after that, he decides to quit being Daredevil. After that scene, the show then pulls off a 1-year time jump, and we see Matt living a completely new life. He lives in a new apartment, he works at a new firm, and this is where the show really starts off, as the stuff before was pretty much a prelude to set the tone and the story for Born Again. We're introduced to these new characters, which I had mentioned before, like Kirsten McDuffie, who's Matt's new partner-in-law, Heather Glenn, a new romantic interest, and of course, Cherry, like the absolute goat. Yeah, but the thing about Cherry is that he knows that Matt is Daredevil, as he saw him on that rooftop, which actually has some potential for them to have an interesting dynamic, but he just barely does anything throughout this show. So even though we're introduced to this totally new cast of characters, unfortunately, I don't think that they really make their mark. Not in this episode when they're introduced, nor the entire season. Even Heather Glenn, who has the most screen time out of these characters, she doesn't really make her mark as much as other romantic interests for Matt, like Karen or especially Elektra. On the other side of things, we see Wilson Fisk, but this time he's preparing to run as a candidate to become mayor of New York. This is basically directly adapting the Mayor Fisk run from the comics, which is really interesting to see, and actually just spices Fisk's character up by going from an underground crime boss to basically the mayor of New York. And as much as I really love this idea of seeing Fisk rise to such a power like this, the race itself was just so extremely rushed, to the point where he decided that he wants to run for mayor and then becomes the mayor in the very same episode. In my opinion, I mean, this kind of arc really felt like it definitely needed at least 2 episodes, especially since this is such a heavy-handed episode with Foggy's death and all, and introducing all of these characters, and we also got Fisk's campaign, which in turn then made the whole process of Fisk becoming mayor feel too rushed. There are some really standout scenes from this episode, however, most notably the diner conversation between Matt and Fisk, which was probably the best scene in this episode. It was such a really intriguing scene, and it really felt like it was just these 2 old foes having a conversation, and almost like they're reuniting from that old show.
Didn't she shoot you in the face?
And the other standout scene for me this episode was obviously the final one. That whole sequence was just so amazing. It really captivated me and just actually put some hope for me for the rest of the show. Putting on TV on the radio is just like a staple of having great TV endings at this point. And to play with the lighting and stuff, with the red light on Matt, and Matt hearing all the people, yelling for help, and Fisk on his ivory tower with that white lining on him. It was great. That was a really great ending. And to be honest, it kind of felt like it should have been the ending of a season. Like, it really felt like that, but this is just the first episode. So yeah, overall, I think this first episode was probably the messiest in the entire show. As you can really tell, this was just like such a hodgepodge of the old stuff mixed in with the new stuff, which actually just really put a sour taste on my mouth when I watched this for the first time. Like, it did not give me a good first impression for the show. The pacing was just all over the place, which felt really jarring, like going from a very intense opening with Foggy's death to a slow time jump introducing these characters, then back to a fast pace with Fisk's campaign at the same time. You get what I mean. And I think also one of the biggest complaints for me is that it's also the ugliest looking episode. Because the sheer amount of bad CG and the green screen, and it's not just from that first fight scene, like there were so many green screen shots throughout this episode that it just put me off every single time because it was just overall ugly to look at, and it just made me think that it was an overall downgrade from the great visuals from the Netflix show. I do like the setup for the season, however, especially after that shocking opening, it really set the tone for a very dark and bleak season for Matt especially, and it also sets up these comparisons and parallels between Matt and Fisk, which will be a very prevalent theme throughout the season.
How do you say lawyers in Spanish?
Lawyers? Abogados.
El Grande Avocados.
The second episode of this show is actually, in my opinion, an improvement over what we've seen in the previous one. I feel like this episode really tackled a lot of the issues that I had with the first episode, where the pacing, first of all, is much steadier now. It took a few steps back so it can actually simmer. This episode felt similar to how an average Netflix Daredevil episode used to be. Slow but steady paced, methodical, good character writing and development, which eventually ended in an explosive final scene. We got to see a wider narrative where Matt and Fisk's storylines are actually given time to actually simmer with the audience. Like, it felt like there was much more space to breathe in between scenes in this episode, whereas with the first episode, everything was just so intense and quick that there was just barely any breathing ground in that episode. We also get to see the introduction of Hector Ayala's White Tiger with his whole court case, where in the beginning of the episode he was accused of killing an undercover cop, which also opens up the corrupt cop / Punisher storyline. This plot eventually leads to Matt accepting Hector as a client to defend him in court, but he needed the witness of the crime to testify to save basically Hector. So Matt finds the witness of the crime who was crucial for this court case, and he is confronted by those corrupt cops that Hector was accused by. Matt then gets into a really bloody brawl and just beats the absolute shit out of these cops, and of course he does his signature yell. I want to take a moment to talk about this particular fight scene, as it is essentially a real huge turning point for Matt, since at this point he hadn't been violent or fought anyone in basically a year since Foggy died. And I think the lead up and the fight scene itself was quite good. Like, that whole scene was just so tense, and it left me wondering whether Matt was going to fight these cops or not, as he was quite literally pleading to the cops not to kill him. But we know that he was probably pleading for himself to not let out this devil inside him. But man, the way that this fight scene was shot was just not it, man. There are so many cuts in this like really short sequence that you can barely tell which punches are landing and what the hell is going on. I also feel like this scene was very brushed off quite quickly in the next episode, where the cop, Officer Powell, just assumes that Matt is just like some random skilled blind fighter who's also a lawyer. Like, that isn't at all suspicious of Matt. Anyways, on Fisk's side, we see him basically in his first days as becoming mayor, where he's basically letting people know that he's standing on business and that the people elected the right man. But we also get to see things from his personal side, where we see him and Vanessa going basically through this marriage crisis because Fisk left for some time and Vanessa basically cheated on him. And the time that he had spent away, Vanessa actually elevated the criminal business that he had by making it bulletproof, and she thinks that by Fisk coming back and wanting to become mayor, it kind of ruins everything. So they actually start going through therapy to, guess who, Matt's girlfriend, who at this point Matt doesn't know that Heather is their therapist because, what's it called? Client confidentiality, I guess. In this episode, there is this particular scene which I really want to talk about because it's probably the scene which had me thinking the most. Because this scene kind of teased an itch that I really wanted the show to scratch for Matt Murdock. Of course, I'm talking about the church scene, where at one point in the episode, there's this random scene which almost seems like comes out of nowhere, where Matt stands outside of church and just stares at it. This left me so puzzled, as this was basically a question that I had lingering in my mind throughout these 2 episodes, which was obviously, when are we going to see Matt pray or, be religious? And to just see him like awkwardly stand and stare outside that church instead of, actually going in and praying like he used to in the Netflix show, it kind of just feels like we were blue-balled. However, I kind of gave this scene the benefit of the doubt, because at this point in the show, I thought that, okay, maybe he abandoned his faith after Foggy and he crossed that line with Bullseye, as he probably felt like he didn't deserve redemption. The same way he quit being Daredevil, as he felt he lost the privilege. So at this point, I was like, okay, maybe he comes back to his faith later on in the season, which we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Oh.
Good morning, sunshine.
Moving on to the 3rd episode, which is pretty much the most legal drama this show gets. Like, the whole episode just basically revolves around Hector's court case. And honestly, I think this is one of the best episodes in the entire season. I feel like this is where the show really picks up some steam and really dials in with the stuff and the tone and the setup that the 1st and the 2nd episode mostly set. It's a very focused episode with pretty much the entire thing revolving around Hector's trial and Matt trying his best to prove him innocent. However, the witness that Matt saved, who was just so crucial to the court case, ruined everything because he testified incorrectly because he was afraid of those corrupt cops. And with no hope in sight, Matt basically pulls off a Saul Goodman by exposing Hector without his consent as the White Tiger in court in order to garner the jury's sympathy. Matt just straight up exposing Hector like that just felt way out of character for me, especially since he didn't even ask Hector to pull off that stunt in court. And it's kind of ironic because out of all people, Matt is really the only one to know how valuable a secret identity is. So not even consulting Hector about that just felt way off character for Matt, and at least there should have been a scene where he would discuss that with Hector himself. Anyways, after that, they bring in a bunch of witnesses to vouch for Hector as the White Tiger, as they show basically, how much of a good guy he is and how much he's helped the community. And the jury's verdict basically ends up being that Hector was innocent for all the charges that he was accused of. So after this, Hector walks out all happy and stuff, and he's finally free. He dons the White Tiger mask once again as he prepares to be a hero for the night, and it just ends right there. This was such a heartbreaking moment, like mostly because knowing what Hector went through just for him to get killed off so quickly and so brutally, the man was just basically executed. It's a very tragic and depressing scene to end off this episode, which also teases once again the Punisher logo. And Hector's death, obviously, as a vigilante, really marks it as another huge landmark for Matt in his journey to return as Daredevil eventually. After seeing what Hector went through and Matt using the legal system to the best possible ways that he could, it really was a turning point for Matt to see the justice system's fallibility and realize that after all the trouble that they went through, he ends up dead the moment he gets out. It's also a bit disappointing at the same time, knowing that that's it for Hector Ayala's White Tiger. He was just extremely short-lived and had a lot of potential. Obviously, rest in peace to his actor, which really did an amazing performance for the time that he had. Speaking about Matt in this episode, there is another scene similar to that in episode 2, which teases once again his religious aspect. Well, it depends on how you look at it. There's this one scene in the middle of this episode where Matt is standing in an empty courtroom, and the way it was shot and how Matt is behaving in the scene, I just couldn't help but feel that this should have taken place in a church. The Netflix show has so many moments like these where when Matt is facing extreme difficulties in life, he would find consolation by going to church, where he would sometimes get advice from Father Lantham. And those dialogue scenes between him and Father Lanth were actually just some of the best scenes of the Netflix show by far. However, now we just get to see Matt in an empty courtroom, and that's it. When I watched this, again, I surmised that it was Matt's feeling of not deserving to go to church, and that now he's fully put his faith in the justice system fully, like the court was his church. So he tries to find consolation in the courtroom the same way he used to in a church.
I'm not getting a dog.
What? You don't like dogs? Who doesn't like dogs?
I love dogs.
Everybody loves dogs.
The next episode of our fellow show is, in my opinion, just a borderline filler episode. And I say borderline because the second half of this really carries this episode as a whole. The first half is basically Matt reeling in from Hector's death. However, for some reason, we don't get to see his reaction to the news, which I feel like could have benefited a lot. But eventually he starts looking into his murder and finds out a very grisly discovery. But not until he is tasked to take care of a client of his who was arrested for stealing caramel corn. And it's this caramel corn side plot which is what pretty much takes up the first half of this episode's runtime, as it's basically about this guy, Matt's client Leroy Bradford, who gets arrested for stealing caramel corn and doesn't want to do any time in prison. So Matt does his lawyer stuff, he negotiates and literally rizzes his way so Leroy can only spend a few days in prison. However, Leroy is still not happy with this after Matt got him basically the best deal that he could, as he literally didn't want to do any time for his crime. He goes on to rant about how the system failed guys like him and that it spends more money to keep him in jail than to actually feed them. And I think like this little side plot just didn't contribute anything to the plot itself, and barely for Matt himself. And I get it, like the reason why they added this is basically just for another point for Matt to realize of the fallibility of the justice system. But we literally got to see that with the White Tiger case, and that was a bigger reason. Adding this sort of minor side plot of this guy getting arrested for caramel corn just felt like very unnecessary, especially after the White Tiger stuff. Anyways, then we get to the really good part of this episode, which is the second half, which is basically when Matt investigates Hector's crime scene and discovers a bullet with a Punisher engraving on it. He then goes ahead and finds the man, Frank Castle himself, and this is where, I'm not even kidding, the best scene in this entire show takes place. First of all, seeing Jon Bernthal back as the Punisher is just so great to see. I mean, the man has solidified himself as one of the best comic book castings of all time. And to just see him back in this is just so refreshing. I mean, Frank just completely dominates and takes up this scene right as soon as he shows up. He quite literally just eats it all up. But the highlight of the scene, of course, was the conversation between Frank and Matt. And wow, it really is the best scene in this entire show. I think this is the closest this show got to the Netflix show. I think it was like right up there in terms of quality. The writing here is just so tight and focused and well written that it almost feels like it's from a completely different show. Frank tests Matt in ways that no other character has in the season so far. He makes him realize that everything he's doing is because of Foggy and his loss. And Frank actually empathizes with Matt by bringing up the loss of his own son and justifying the stuff that he does for his late family. I believe that this conversation was so important that it is possibly responsible for Matt's eventual return to being Daredevil, as in this very conversation, Frank convinces Matt almost totally that the only way he's gonna make a difference is actually by being Daredevil. And by not being Daredevil, he's kind of like not doing his duty. Frank is probably the only character who literally sees through Matt. Like, he just knows him, and he knows that darker part of him, the devil, is always there. Honestly, this scene was just so refreshing to see, especially after the caramel corn part, because the difference between that and this is literally night and day. Like, it's hard to believe that they're from the same episode.
The scarf looked better. Nice ears.
They're horns.
This episode was by far the worst episode in this show. Like, I don't know what was going through their heads. Like, I think this episode was really the stuff of the old guys, but it just does not feel like it belongs in this show. The best way that I can describe episode 5 is that it wasn't really a Daredevil episode. It was more of an MCU episode, and there's a huge difference between the two. The episode essentially revolves around a bank heist conducted by Fisk's thugs to infiltrate the bank in order to get $1.8 million from a gem which is located in the bank's underground vault. Fortunately and coincidentally enough, Matt Murdock was also in the same bank that day and at the same time to witness that bank heist. And with him this time we get Miss Marvel's dad, who we'll talk about later. But pretty much the entire episode is just then Matt being like this overpowered badass and ultimately saves the day from these goons. So that's the whole plot of the episode. And yeah, as you might tell, it's a filler. It doesn't really move the overall plot at all, other than the whole 1.8 million Luca thing which is going on with the Fisks. But even that doesn't even go anywhere because at the end of the episode, the gem stays in the bank. But the main problem isn't that the episode itself is a filler, it's more how the episode feels, which just gives you the biggest whiplash you've gotten after watching the previous 4 episodes. As an episode, like the way it was shot, the way it was written, it feels too disjointed from what we're used to in both the Netflix show and what we've seen so far. It feels very light in tone. It almost has this kind of like comedic nature to it, given the situation. It's also pretty much a bottle episode with the whole episode taking place in the bank itself, which usually Daredevil episodes are much wider in terms of a narrative. Like we get scenes from all fronts, in different locations and settings, and we get advancing plots from different characters. But for this one, it's purely in the bank for most part. And obviously the reason why I called this an MCU episode earlier, other than the reasons that I just stated, it was just shoehorning in Miss Marvel's dad and also referencing Miss Marvel herself like a million times. Like, I'm not even kidding. They even include a Funko Pop. Like, bro, we get it. This inclusion, this reference just felt extremely forced. Like they were just constantly trying to remind us like, hey, we're in the MCU now. And like, okay, I get it. Daredevil now is more prevalent in the MCU more than ever. And I get that. And I don't expect them to not reference other stuff going on in the MCU. But choosing Miss Marvel out of all characters, and especially her dad, to cameo for an entire episode was just not the way to do it. It's just such a stark contrast, first of all, between the characters like Daredevil and Miss Marvel's dad, but it's also a contrast to see how the MCU used to be referenced in the Netflix show itself, where before it was kind of like they were scared, like referencing events such as Loki's invasion in the Avengers. It was very subtle. There was barely any direct conversation from it, but it was actually pretty neat. Whereas here, they're basically just shoving it down our throats, like, hey, Miss Marvel, she's in the same universe. Also, one complaint that I had about this was that given the circumstances, Matt doesn't really consider even a bit to return as Daredevil in the bank. Like everything we've seen so far, Matt goes through a lot of stuff, which is constantly tempting him to go back to donning Daredevil again. This episode, however, he doesn't even think about becoming Daredevil again. He just calls the cops and turns back to the bank to save the day as Matt Murdock. Overall, this episode doesn't really have to offer too much. Like, as an episode on its own, I guess it's a pretty fun watch, like getting to see Matt kick some ass and looking at it as part of a 9-episode season with an overarching narrative. It's very disappointing to see this just shoehorn in, and it just feels extremely disjointed from what we've been seeing as well as what we were expecting from the previous episode, given that we had just seen that incredible scene with the Punisher, which was just so dark and mature, and then we get this. Best part of the episode is by far just seeing Matt shatter that guy's knee in a million pieces. Like, bro didn't even interrogate him, he just did that for the love of the game.
I mean, I assume she's hot. She hot?
How would I know? This again?
So after that bizarre and weird fifth episode, we finally pick up the pace again with episode 6. The main plot point of this episode is that this is where Muse is officially introduced. Muse was the highly anticipated villain who was heavily marketed in the promotion material for this show, and I was really excited to see him making an appearance in the show. He did have a very brief appearance in like one of the early episodes, but this is where he gets his formal introduction. But this episode is also very important for both Matt and Fisk's character arcs, as it basically marks as a turning point for both of them, where they both give in to their inner violent natures at last. This is done by a setup being presented to both of these characters in the first half of the episode, which then ultimately leads to a very explosive and action-heavy second half. On Matt's part, he is mostly motivated by Muse himself, as at this point, Muse is now being widespread in the news as this very creepy serial killer who's killed 60 people and was essentially using their blood for art on murals. A little note on this is that it is kind of strange how it took 60 people to be killed or go missing until people actually started to notice that there's this serial killer going around using their blood on walls. I do really like Muse's presentation and presence in this episode. He does give off a very sinister and pure evil look. I mean, looking at his mask on his own just gives off that very dark and evil vibe. I mean, his mask just goes way too hard, honestly. Anyways, Muse prompts both Matt and Wilson to stop Muse from killing more people. Fisk sends out his special Punisher-loving task force to go to find him, while on the other hand, Matt at first tries to inform the authorities about Hector Ayala's niece going missing to find Muse, but he decides to confront the situation by returning as Daredevil. And this is finally the part where Matt comes back as Daredevil, and it's what essentially prompted Matt to don the horns again. This is the one time where Matt just truly lost faith in the justice system, because he knew that he couldn't trust the cops to go to find Muse and save Hector's niece in time. So what he does, he takes matters in his own hands and becomes the devil of Hell's Kitchen once again. However, I cannot help but notice that there is just something off with this scene. Matt deciding to go back to being Daredevil with just a simple fuck it makes the whole thing feel a bit too underwhelming. Like, in that scene, you would think that there would be a little bit more build up to Matt making this very, very crucial and personal decision, a decision where he would essentially break his oath and promise that he took a previous year to stop being Daredevil. A choice that he made not only because he crossed the line with Bullseye, but to honor his late best friend. And Matt saying fuck it in the middle of a phone call almost makes it seem like he forgot about the promise that he had made. Like, you think that he would give it a bit further thought. Like, I knew he was tight with time, but I feel like there should have been allowed a little bit more tension, a little bit more elevation in that scene, and see Matt dress up as Daredevil once again. And it also doesn't really help that literally the next scene just cuts to a really bad CGI Daredevil running across the rooftops looking very uncanny. Anyways, over on Fisk's side, in the first half of the episode, he goes to this like black tie event, which is just filled with these really rich people, including Lalo.
Yo soy Eduardo, but you can call me Lalo.
And Fisk is basically trying to get any private investors that he could to back up his Red Hook port project that he's been working on pretty much the entire season so far. Shortly after, he has the scene with Vanessa where he tells her that politics and his new life and his old life aren't so different after all. He also starts showing signs that he's getting bigger again, which I actually really liked, as Kingpin is just this beast of a man. And this part essentially is basically what prompts him to the second half, where he decides to confront Adam, who is Vanessa's old lover from when in Fisk he was away. But obviously in Fisk style, he was keeping him as a hostage. So at this point in the episode, both Fisk and Matt have reached this turning point in their characters where they are both on the verge of returning to their old violent ways. Matt finds Muse and beats the absolute shit out of him, in which is, in my opinion, the best shot and the best choreographed fight in the entire show. Like, it is not even a question. This fight was actually really, really delightful and fun to watch. Like, I found myself watching this fight scene over and over again, just how good it was. And unlike pretty much every single fight scene before, there were barely any camera cuts in this one fight scene. And you can almost feel like every single punch, kick, and blow landing. In my personal opinion, I think this fight was the closest the show got to basically an average hallway fight in the Netflix show. However, while this is going on, while Daredevil and Muse are fighting, Fisk confronts Adam in his little cell and provokes him to fight. However, Fisk's fight, I'd say, is as brutal, if not more brutal, than Matt's, where, first of all, he doesn't even let Adam hit him once. Like, the man just pulled off a Muhammad Ali on him and dodged every single attack. I feel like this was Fisk basically humiliating Adam the whole fight, probably to show the same way how he felt when he learned that Adam was screwing with his wife. But then bro just literally grabs him and breaks a brick wall with his head. Yeah, I mean, like bro's back. The interesting thing about these fights, however, is the way that they were filmed and edited, which were actually to be in conjunction with each other. Like, there are frequent cuts between these fight scenes. Obviously, the parallels here are very apparent. Like, it's not the most subtle thing ever. The show is basically showing us that even though that they tried staying away from it, both Fisk and Matt eventually gave in to their violent natures. However, it's the reason why they're being violent is what separates their characters. Matt chooses to be violent to dispense justice. Like, that's the whole thing of why he becomes Daredevil. In this case, he's fighting Muse to stop him from killing Hector Ayala's niece and to save her. However, there is a much darker side to Matt than just that, than to just purely save Hector Ayala's niece. Because even though Matt is doing this for a good cause on the surface, there is a part of Matt where he secretly enjoys this type of behavior. And this was a really, really good recurring theme that was also very prevalent in the Netflix show, where Matt's violence sometimes goes off a little bit too much, but he decides to disguise it as justice. So there is a part of Matt, the devil part of him, which secretly loves showing this type of violence, and it's more prevalent and evident in the scene more than ever. On the other hand, however, the extreme end, Wilson Fisk delivers violence purely for self-pleasure. Now, Fisk has always been a very sadistic character in his actions and this behavior. Like, he displays this nature in very extreme ways, such as in the infamous car door scene from season 1 of Daredevil. And just the way that he just literally grabs Adam's head and smashes it here is just, it is brutal. I mean, Matt at least has the excuse that he's using violence for the greater good, and he's not actually killing people, like he's holding himself back with the no-kill rule. But Fisk is doing it for the love of the game, bro. Like, he just loves this shit. And is that very thin line which contrasts both of these characters, which in my opinion is just very, very well shown in this very episode and the sequence. Overall, I think this was a really good episode. The only thing which I didn't like is Daredevil's return itself, which I talked about, but other than that, I think the fact that seeing Daredevil and the Kingpin returning together like that is such a great way to see these characters basically go back to their old ways, that I think this was the best episode in these first 6 episodes of the show so far.
Slap on top of that, he can take an unbelievable amount of punishment without one damn complaint.
Last part's the Catholicism.
Following that very good episode, we are now presented with possibly the most disappointing episode in the show with episode 7. Now, I see a lot of people say that this was the worst episode, but I think that still goes to episode 5. 7 for me was just very, very disappointing given what we had seen and what episode 6 had set up. The story basically picks up exactly where episode 6 had ended, with Muse still at large while both Daredevil and Fisk try to find him. What Muse does is he basically makes his way to Heather Glynn's office, but he went there not as Muse, he went there as his real self, Bastion Cooper. He booked an appointment with Heather in like the first episode when we first see him, acting like he wants to be her client. But in actual fact, he wanted to meet her to tell her that she was the one who motivated him to become Muse in the first place. Because in the beginning of the season, Heather was on tour for a book that she had written about masked vigilantes, and Muse found that very inspiring. Bro then goes on to explain his life story where basically he was just a teenager with issues, and the reason why he knew how to fight Daredevil was because he took like 3 months of Taekwondo and he killed his Taekwondo teacher. And man, I mean, this was just such a huge letdown for Muse's character. I mean, turning his mystery as this sinister force into just this 5-minute exposition scene was a huge letdown, possibly the most disappointing thing about this show so far. They literally turned one of the most evil and mysterious villains from the Daredevil comics to just basically an edgy teenager with parent issues. I mean, his setup from the previous episode was just so well done. I mean, you can feel how terrifying he was in episode 6, but in this episode, he just loses all of his aura immediately. Anyway, obviously, Heather freaks the fuck out, and that's where our main boy, Daredevil, comes in to save the day. Daredevil and Muse fight for a while in what is once again a very, very poorly filmed fight. I would say this is one of the worst fight scenes in this show. Like, it's just so jarring. We went from the best fight scene in episode 6 to this. And not to mention the fact that this whole sequence takes place during the day. And seeing Daredevil during the day put me off so bad. Like, it was just The Dark Knight Rises all over again. But during this fight, Heather just pops out of nowhere and absolutely mag dumps Muse, and he dies. And that was basically the end of Muse for this show, unfortunately. Like, talk about a wasted opportunity, man. Like, Muse had so much potential to be this sort of recurring villain for Daredevil, but he was just capped by his girlfriend. And the fact that Muse was just so heavily marketed in the promotion material, like making him look like he was basically an overarching villain in the entire season, but he ended up just being in these 2 episodes, which one of them was just extremely disappointing. And another disappointing thing about Muse was his character himself. Like, the fact that in the comics, Muse is an inhuman, and he has these supernatural powers where Daredevil can't even sense him, making him obviously very hard for Daredevil to fight. But here, they just made him into a regular guy with some Taekwondo experience, which, let's be honest, should not have been able to touch Daredevil in the first place. Now, regarding Muse, I've seen some theories or cope that Muse might still be alive, or at least revived some way. I think at least the way that I would do it is that he could have a similar thing going on just to how Electro was handled in season 2 of Daredevil, where he can be revived by the Hand or some other supernatural force, and that way he could be given his actual comic accurate powers and be a more comic accurate version of him. Honestly, personally, I think that should be the way to go about this, because I would really love to see Muse again. Like, bro just can't be dead after those 2 episodes. Like, it would be a huge waste.
I leave you 2 alone for 1 minute.
She wanted to teach me.
Finally, episode 8. This marks the first episode which was totally written and shot from scratch by the new directors, who are Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. And let me tell you, you can definitely tell that this was done by a new team. The difference between this and what we saw before, especially with episode 7, is literally night and day. The episode starts off the best way it possibly can by bringing my boy Dex. I mean, who doesn't love some Dex, man? We see him in a max security prison where he is now being transferred to general population. We later find out that he was specifically transferred by Fisk for some unknown reason. And with this scene, like, you can just literally tell that these new writers desperately wanted to get their hands back on Dex because it's literally the first thing they showed in this episode. And I mean, who can blame them? It's Dex after all, and I'm just really happy they're making use of him. Later on in this episode, we find Matt at Josie's bar, who finds out that the night that Foggy was murdered, he was pre-celebrating a win that he had with a case. The very case which led to Bullseye killing him. This leads Matt down a rabbit hole to investigate Foggy's death, and he realizes that Bullseye didn't kill Foggy just for fun, but more than likely he was hired by someone to put out a hit on Foggy. Matt then finds out that Dex himself requested Matt to visit him in prison, in which Matt accepts, and he is told that Dex wants some sort of deal to get him out of a gem pop. Obviously, Matt is infuriated by this and refuses this, but Dex, he tries to leverage him by telling him that he has the information to tell Matt the real reason Foggy died. Hearing this, Matt is completely outraged, the fact that Dex tried to leverage with him with his best friend's death, and he slams Dex's head on the table and he blames it on Dex that he smashed his face in himself.
Thank you, counselor. Fuck you.
Having his face smashed, we then find Dex in some kind of infirmary at the prison, and we see him cracking something in his mouth. Apparently, Matt banging his head actually loosened one of his teeth, which Dex then uses as a projectile to escape from prison. And I mean, come on, this is like, this is the coolest and the hardest scene in this entire show. Like, bro, Dex is just him, man. I love him. Shortly after, Matt and Heather are invited to go to Mayor Fisk's Black Ball event, in which Matt arrives like 1,000 hours late. He warns Heather about Fisk himself after he sees that she is putting too much faith in him. He then literally rizzes up Vanessa like, bro, how does he do it, man? And confronts her about knowing that she was the one who put out the hit on Foggy. In the meantime, Dex, after escaping prison, he makes his way to this event, brings out a sniper, and tries to assassinate Fisk. But Matt actually gets in the way, saving him. The look on Bullseye's face after he realizes what just happened is just gold, man. Like he probably thought that he missed at that point, and we know Bullseye, he does not miss. I also love how the news of Bullseye escaping prison was spread. Like it almost seemed like it was this boogeyman who was out in the wild again, and everyone who knew about it was afraid. Also, Dex got a thing for ruining events, man. Like bro, gotta chill. The episode then ends with Matt laying down on the floor with a bullet wound on his shoulder while a bloody red light fills the screen. Yeah, this episode is the best in this entire show, like bar none. The entire episode was nearly perfect. I'd say it was tense without sacrificing pacing. Everything was flowing, stuff was going on all the time, shit was going down all the time, whether it was the Dex stuff, whether Foggy's death conspiracy, or the Matt and the Fisk stuff. Matt also coming exactly into Bullseye's words at the end of the episode was just poetic and led to a really great final scene. Fisk and his task force continue to show how raw and brutal they are as they literally fry a guy's hand just for taking pictures, and Fisk outing Lalo Salamanca as a swordsman in order for him to get leverage. I think in terms of writing, this is the best this show got by far, and it just makes me wish that this entire season had this level of quality, because if it did, it might have had a chance to be as good as one of the Netflix seasons, but this is what we got.
My mom wanted me to be a butcher, you know that?
Oh, not the butcher story.
I said, no, Mom, I want to be a lawyer. I don't remember what I said next.
No, you never do.
And finally, we get to the season finale of Daredevil Born Again Season 1. This is the episode where every single plot thread, every single character arc comes to a climax in this finale. And it kind of does that This is also the second of the 2 episodes which were written from scratch, and I would say that for most of the episode, the quality from episode 8 was retained. However, I'd still say that episode 8 was a bit better. Episode 9 starts off once again with the main man, Dex. The scene is basically a flashback of Vanessa visiting Dex in prison to release him in order for him to go assassinate Foggy. And this is where we see the mystery of Foggy's death unfold. Apparently, Foggy and his client at the time were tampering with something involving Vanessa's business, and she didn't want that in the way, so she hired Dex to kill him. After that, we see Matt in the hospital after being shot from the previous episode, and he calls Heather... Bro. That was probably the funniest scene. On the other hand, Fisk, after nearly being assassinated in the previous episode, he decides to lock down New York, pulling off a Dark Knight Rises once again. He also sends Buck, who is basically like a British Wesley, to kill Matt in the hospital to make it seem like Matt succumbed to his wounds to appear as a hero who died for Fisk. But Buck goes to the hospital and finds that Matt is missing, as Matt went back to his apartment. How did he go from the hospital to his apartment in that hospital gown? I have no idea, but yeah. Once he arrives at his apartment, he finds his good old buddy Frank giving him a warm welcome home. This time with a fresh fade and an aftershave. And bro, you know shit's about to go down when Frank gets that fade, man. Like, he just locks in. And after a brief conversation, Fisk's special task force are sent to Matt's apartment to kill him, where we finally get to see the long-awaited Daredevil and Punisher team up, which was underwhelming. I personally did not like the way this scene was shot. First of all, it was way too dark. I mean, sure, filming a scene at night is hard. Like, it is really hard. But we've had plenty fight scenes set at night, especially in the original show, which looked way better than this. Other than that, there was this abnormal amount of slow-mo shots, especially to the moments where Frank was killing people, which kind of made this feel like this was shot by Zack Snyder. Like, why are we using so many slow-mo shots? I don't know, to be honest, I just really didn't feel the scene at all, but I guess it was fun seeing Frank and Matt team up and fight together. The best part about this, to be honest, wasn't even the fight itself. It was their little conversations before and afterwards, which kind of make them seem like an old married couple. Matt's apartment then gets bombed and they fly straight out the balcony, where then Karen Page makes what is literally like an Avengers level entrance. Like, bro, where'd you come from? On the other side of things, Fisk prepares for his ultimate plan while he finds out that Commissioner Gallo was about to betray him. Now, you guys probably remember the infamous car door scene back in season 1 of Daredevil. They somehow found a way to one-up that, because Fisk literally grabs Gallo's head and squashes it with his bare hands like a watermelon in what is probably the most brutal and graphic scene Marvel has ever done. Like, I was really surprised Disney actually went through with this. Like, seriously, this shit was on the boys level of violence. Matt and Karen then try to find out why Vanessa put out the hit on Foggy, and they find out that apparently, according to a charter from 1855, the Red Hook port could be completely annexed from the United States, in which Fisk's plan was to turn that place into basically a free-for-all area, so any illegal activity could not be prosecuted by the United States. And Foggy knew about this with his client, and that is why Vanessa killed him. We also get to see Frank then just decide to go on an absolute free-for-all. Like, he just went on a total massacre at Red Hook, which is probably the best part of this show. And Matt and Karen then follow suit. But when they get to the port, they realize that Matt is just heavily outnumbered. He can't stop everything by himself, and he decides to turn back to form a team. Now, when you think about a team with Daredevil, you think like there would be other street level heroes and vigilantes like Spider-Man, like the Defenders, and other, heroes at that level, right? But no, instead we got Josie and Cherry and Detective Kim. Like, Obviously, I mean, the proper team will be assembled probably in the second season, but this reveal was just so funny. At the very end, then, Fisk pulls off a Homelander and puts New York under martial law with zero tolerance for vigilantes. We then see a room filled with a bunch of vigilantes all locked up in a cage, including Lalo and Frank himself. When the credits roll, we get a mid-credit scene, however, where we see what is possibly the dumbest scene in the entire show.
Thank you, Anthony.
Like, bro, you have an ultra cop killing machine who you probably just saw brutalize most of your friends, and you give him your hand? Like, I get this cop was probably another one of those Punisher lovers, I get, but bro, you saw how he treated your friends. Why would you give him your hand? Also, I think the biggest complaint that I have with this episode was that Marvel just gotta stop doing this whole thing where they do a large citywide event or catastrophe, and the only hero available is that who is the main protagonist of that project. In this case, Daredevil. Like, you're telling me that Kingpin is mayor. He blacked out all of New York City, and there are these riots going around and vigilantes getting killed, and Spider-Man's just chilling somewhere? Like, yeah, I think that part was just the perfect opportunity for Spidey to come in, but we all know the stuff between Sony and Marvel and how Sony's very finicky about having Spider-Man in TV shows, which is just very disappointing. Like, it could have made this episode so much better, and we need that Daredevil and Spider-Man team up, man. We just have to see it. And that basically marks the end of Daredevil Born Again Season 1, which, for final episode, I'm going to be honest, didn't really pay off much from the build-up and the setup that we got from, the entire season, but it really just added more setup for the second one. The highlight of this episode was definitely Frank himself. Like, he really carried the episode. As I said, John Bernthal just steals absolutely every scene that he's in. But I also wish that we got to see more Dex, but, well, it is what it is.
So, when's the next date?
Well, therein lies the true pain.
No.
So, now that we have basically covered every single episode of this season, highlighting some of the most standout moments from each, as well as some of the glaring issues that these episodes had, I feel like it's time to take a step back now and look at the season overall. Overall, I think that Daredevil Born Again is a fine, decent show. Certainly not the worst we've seen from the MCU Disney Plus shows, and I'd say that it is the best that we got from these Disney Plus shows, but however, it was never really a high bar to pass. But when you compare this to the Netflix show, like even just comparing the first season of this and the first season of the Netflix show, it doesn't really compare, and it doesn't really get close to that show. There are moments which do really get close, like the Punisher and Frank scene in episode 4, and the fight scene in episode 6, and episode 8 in its entirety. But, the rest was just, I felt like was really subpar when compared to the quality of the Netflix show. For comparison, I'd say that this show is like slightly better than The Defenders, but then there's just a huge gap between Born Again and seasons 1, 2, and 3 of the original. And I think the worst part of this show and what really brought it down for me, it was just how inconsistent it was in terms of quality. Like, looking at the 9 episodes, we've had episodes which are bad to decent to good. I say like the first 2 episodes are decent. 3, I really enjoyed. I thought it was pretty good. 4 is a bit meh, like the Punisher scene really carried it. 5 is just plain bad. I wouldn't even consider it an episode in the season. 6 is pretty good. I really like that episode. 7 is extremely disappointing. Then 8 and 9 are good. Like, sure, we've had good episodes, but when you look at the season as a whole, it's just a very mixed bag. And the Netflix seasons were just all so consistent in terms of quality that they never had this constant back and forth. The one character writing, which I do have a huge issue with, however, is when it came to Matt and his religious side. I've mentioned this before a couple times in some of the episodes, but Matt's Catholicism is pretty much entirely neglected in this season, save for like the scene where he's standing outside a church in episode 2 and where he's saying a prayer in episode 6. Other than those sort of teases, there's absolutely no mention of Matt's religious side, which is just very, very disappointing. Matt being Catholic is pretty much the central core of his character. Like, it's the whole reason why he dresses up as the devil. And it's also the same reason why he has his no-kill rule, because he cannot be the one to take life. This theme was just so beautifully explored in the original Netflix show throughout the entire 3 seasons, where it plays a very huge part of Matt's life, because that's who Matt is. He's constantly riddled with this Catholic guilt that he feels like he needs to get out by being Daredevil. But in Born Again, there's just absolutely nothing.
What, do you go back to the gym?
Hell no. Do I look capable of making healthy life choices? I went out, Matthew. Went out dancing.
I'm choosing not to believe that.
And yet it's true.
Anyways, guys, I think I've said too much at this point, but those are basically my 2 cents on Daredevil Born Again. It's certainly been an experience making this video, because I really did not expect this thing to turn out as long as it did, but I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out, because I love Daredevil, if you haven't noticed, and I really want this show to be good and to live up to the legacy of the Netflix show, but we're not quite there yet. Hopefully season 2 will be better. I mean, looking at all the teases and the set leaks, it looks pretty good, but we'll see the actual show next year, which I'm actually quite happy with, that season 2 is coming out next year, as we don't have to wait that long. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.